Walt Morgan hadn't driven a rig in 5 years, but his hands still curled like they were wrapped around a steering wheel. He sat in a weathered recliner, the kind that let out a sigh every time he shifted, like it, too, was tired of the years. His living room, dim and silent, smelled faintly of old tobacco and liniment, lit only by the pale blue glow of the television. The air conditioner hummed a tired rhythm, and the clock ticked like it was counting down something he couldn't name. The program flickered to life on the screen, some sort of tech event, crowded and loud, cameras flashing as a vehicle rolled onto the stage. It looked like a mistake. Angular, metallic, like a child's drawing of a truck had come to life in stainless steel. Then the voice came, "This is the Cybertruck," said Elon Musk. The crowd hooped and roared, but Walt squinted at the screen like the world had lost its mind. Musk stood beside it, calm, confident, unbothered by the jeers or jokes that had clearly followed him since the design leaked. "We're not trying to be different just to be different," Musk said. "We're doing it because different is the only way forward." Walt chuckled. "Yeah, okay," he muttered to himself, reaching for the remote, thumb hovering over the power button. But something held him there. That damn voice. Musk kept talking about risk, about how safety was a trap, about pushing limits because doing the same thing over and over was just another kind of death. And there was something in the way he said it, not arrogant, not desperate, just a kind of certainty Walt hadn't felt in a long, long time. He watched the crowd, young and feverish, cheering like they believed something was still possible. Walt sat back, let the remote fall into his lap, and stared at the truck. "You think that thing'll replace real rigs?" he asked aloud to no one. Dust motes danced in the slant of late afternoon sun cutting through the blinds. He leaned forward, knees crackling, and muttered, "Looks like a damn toaster with tires." But still, he didn't turn it off. The Cybertruck, love it or hate it, was a declaration. A middle finger to the rules. It wasn't what anyone expected. And maybe that was the point. Walt rubbed his hands together, the calluses long gone soft. He could still remember the feel of the leather wheel in his Kenworth, the hum of diesel in his bones, the long stretches of blacktop rolling beneath him like a river of time. But that life had ended quietly, with a heart scare and a doctor who said things like, "You've done enough," and "Time to rest," as if that were a gift. Retirement had felt like a punishment. The silence in the house had grown louder every year since Carol passed. The framed photo of her on the mantel showed her smiling, radiant even in a cheap frame, and Walt often found himself talking to her like she was still in the kitchen, like she'd be back any minute with her lemon tea and 1,000 questions about his day. But she wasn't coming back, and the phone didn't ring much anymore, and his son Michael had made it clear that Walt's absence during those crucial years had built a wall taller than either of them wanted to climb. He couldn't blame him. Walt had chased miles instead of moments, thinking the road would always be there to lead him home when he was ready. But home wasn't a place, it was a connection. And he'd let it rust. Musk was still talking. "What's the worst that can happen? You fail. Big deal. You learn. You try again." Walt snorted. "Easy to say when you've got billions." But even as he said it, a flicker of something stirred. Maybe it wasn't about the money. Maybe it was about the refusal to shrink. That night, long after the broadcast ended, Walt sat in the dark, the TV a silent square of static reflection. He didn't move for a while. Didn't need to. His mind was louder than any truck stop he'd ever been to. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? The question came out of nowhere, as if someone had whispered it in his ear. He muttered it aloud, testing how it sounded in the room. What if everything I believed about getting old was wrong? The walls didn't answer, but they didn't laugh either. He stood up, bones resisting, and shuffled toward the hallway. As he passed the closet, he opened it on impulse. The smell of old leather and cedar spilled out. He reached past a forgotten raincoat, pushed aside a stack of bills, and pulled down a dusty box labeled Michael's Stuff. Inside, beneath some crumpled drawings and a tarnished Boy Scout medal, was a small wooden model of a truck. The paint was chipped. The wheels were loose. But it was still holding together. Walt smiled, unexpected and soft. They'd built it together. Michael had been 10, maybe 11. It had rained that weekend, and the two of them had stayed inside, hammering and painting and laughing. It was one of the few weekends he hadn't been on the road. And one of the few memories that still felt warm. He held the model gently, like it might fall apart if he breathed too hard. "You remember this, buddy?" he whispered. "Bet you don't." But he did. Walt set it on the kitchen table, sat down, and stared at it like it held a secret. Maybe it did. Maybe it was reminding him of who he used to be before life got practical, before duty and money and time pulled him into a current he didn't know how to fight. He reached for a pad of paper and a pen. His fingers were stiff, but he wrote anyway. It wasn't much. Just a few lines. About trucks. About aging. About why the Cybertruck made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. He signed it, Old Trucker. Still watching. Then, on a whim, he opened an old blogger account he hadn't touched since 2009. Hit New Post. Titled it, "Real Trucks Don't Die, They Evolve." Copied the lines in. Hit Publish. It was gone in a second. Out there, somewhere, floating in a sea of content nobody ever reads. But for some reason, he felt lighter. As if hitting Publish had opened a window. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear Elon Musk again, "Safe is the greatest trap." Walt chuckled. "Guess I'm not very safe anymore." He stood up, joints aching but spirit strangely alive, and went to bed. That night, he dreamed of highways made of light, trucks without engines roaring into the future, and a version of himself that still had something to build. The road might have changed, but maybe, just maybe, there was still gas in the tank. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Walt hadn't always felt like a ghost in his own house. There was a time, not all that long ago in his mind, when the walls hummed with life, when the kitchen smelled like bacon every Sunday morning, when the door slammed with the rhythm of a boy going out to ride his bike or chase a dog down the street. He remembered the squeak of the screen door, the way Carol would shout, "Don't let it slam," even though he always did, and Michael's little voice yelling, "Bye," like the world was his and he didn't care who knew it. Those days felt like another life now, maybe one he'd dreamed up. Walt stood in the garage that morning, early light slipping in through the grimy window above his workbench. The air smelled like old rubber, motor oil, and dust, his favorite combination, second only to the smell of diesel fuel on a cold morning. He hadn't touched anything in here for years. After Carol died, he couldn't bring himself to throw anything out, but he also couldn't bring himself to care. Now, though, something was different. The little wooden truck from the closet still sat on the kitchen table, and he kept glancing at it like it might speak. That thing had survived decades, a cross-country move, a busted water heater, and a marriage that had gone through its own earthquakes. And now it was just sitting there like a reminder that not everything he'd built had fallen apart. He traced a finger along the side of the model, remembering Michael's tiny hands gripping the paintbrush, how he'd insisted the fenders had to be bright red because trucks need to be brave. He smiled at that. Brave. The word echoed in his chest like a dare. He didn't feel brave. Not now. Not for a long time. Walt remembered the day he bought his first rig, 1981, a used Peterbilt 359, deep green with a silver grille that shined like chrome in the sun. It had cost him more than he'd had, but he'd signed the loan papers with a grin and a handshake and took to the road like a man finally claiming his purpose. The road made sense to him. It had rules. It had rhythm. It didn't ask questions or hold grudges. And it never looked back. That was the problem. It never looked back. He remembered the early fights with Carol, her sitting on the couch with their newborn, pleading with him to skip one more trip, to stay for just a week. But the bills were stacked and the runs were good, and he'd always told himself there'd be time later. Always later. But later had a funny way of showing up empty-handed. Michael had stopped calling by the time he was 30. Their conversations, when they did happen, were stiff and mechanical, like two strangers trying to find a shared language. "You were always gone," Michael had said the last time they talked, 3 years ago. "Every memory I have is of you leaving, or coming back just long enough to leave again." Walt had stood there, phone pressed to his ear, mouth full of words he couldn't say. "I did it for you," he'd wanted to shout. But Michael wouldn't have understood. Or maybe he would have. Maybe that's what made it worse. The truth was, Walt didn't know how to be anything but a driver. He didn't know how to sit still. He didn't know how to listen. He knew how to push forward, how to muscle through exhaustion, how to sleep in the cab and eat from truck stop diners and keep the wheels turning, because if they weren't, neither was he. But retirement wasn't like slowing down. It was like hitting a wall. One day you're needed, you're moving, you're part of the machine, and the next, you're just a guy whose phone doesn't ring. When Carol got sick, he tried to make up for it. He stopped working full-time, stayed home, cooked breakfast, drove her to every appointment. But cancer didn't care about apologies, and after she passed, the house felt too quiet, too clean, too hollow. He filled the silence with the TV, old reruns of Bonanza, and long naps he didn't want but couldn't avoid. The neighbors waved, but no one came over. His doctor said he was doing fine for his age, which felt like being congratulated for not dying fast enough. He knew he was getting slower, knees aching, back stiff, hands not quite as steady as they used to be, but the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the rust. The way everything he loved to do had gone unused for so long, he started to forget what it felt like to be good at anything. And now, somehow, all that had been stirred up by a weird-looking truck on a screen and a voice that said it was okay to be crazy if crazy meant you still cared. He looked down at his hands, spotted, stiff, but still his. He missed the feel of building something. Real building, not fixing a loose hinge or unclogging a sink. He missed the way time disappeared when he was in the zone, oil on his jeans, music blasting from a tinny radio, the world narrowed down to one simple truth: this part fits here. So that morning, Walt made a decision that felt ridiculous and small and oddly terrifying. He was going to build something again. Not just for the sake of busywork, but for himself. For the kid who painted red fenders, for the woman who always believed in his hands, for the man he used to be when he wasn't afraid of stillness. He started with a broom, sweeping out the garage one swath at a time. The dust put up a fight, but he didn't mind. He opened the drawers of his old workbench, half of them stuck shut with age, the other half packed with tools he hadn't touched in a decade. He held a wrench like it was a long-lost friend. He knew he couldn't rebuild a real truck. Not with these joints, not with this body. But maybe something smaller. A project. A model. Something electric. Something modern. Something weird. Like that damn Cybertruck. He opened an old laptop that took 5 full minutes to boot. The screen was dim and the battery barely held a charge, but it worked. He Googled Cybertruck specs, then RC truck builds, then how to make your hands stop shaking after 60. The last one made him laugh out loud. He wasn't trying to stop time. He just wanted to meet it on better terms. That night, he went to bed with his mind humming, not from worry, but from ideas. He dreamed again. Not of highways or regrets, but of wires and bolts and pieces coming together into something that shouldn't work but did. Like him. The next morning, he'd go to the hardware store. The guys there would probably look at him like he'd lost it. Maybe he had. Maybe that was the point. He'd start with what he had, fill in the blanks later. He had tools, time, stubbornness. And a tiny truck on his kitchen table that had outlived everything else he'd built. He looked at it again before heading to bed. "Let's see if I've still got it," he whispered. In the silence that followed, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel old. He felt like something was beginning. Walt's knees cracked like popcorn as he bent down to pick up a package from the front porch. The morning sun hadn't fully burned through the haze yet, and the cool air carried the dry, dusty scent of the Kansas prairie in late summer. The box was heavier than he expected, filled with wires, tiny motors, plastic gears, and small metal parts he'd ordered the day before from a hobbyist site. He brought it into the kitchen and set it next to the little wooden truck model, which now looked like a relic beside this new box of the future. He stood there, scratching his chin, asking himself if he was actually about to spend his retirement trying to build a mini version of a vehicle most people thought was a joke. The Cybertruck, love it or hate it, had burrowed into his thoughts like a splinter. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't the design, or even the technology. It was the idea that someone had looked at everything trucks were supposed to be and said, what if they weren't? That kind of guts made Walt's blood move a little faster. But standing in his kitchen now, with a creaky back and hands that stiffened when the weather changed, doubt crept in just as quick. What was he doing? Building a model? For what? Who was he trying to impress, himself? His son, who wouldn't even return a call? The grandkids he barely knew? He sat down hard in his chair, the old one with the wobbly leg he kept meaning to fix. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. The kitchen was still. No clocks ticking. No fridge humming. Just the silence of a house used to having nobody to talk to. He looked down at his hands, big, square, and calloused in all the wrong places now. He flexed his fingers, testing the joints. They didn't move like they used to. Neither did he. He remembered what Dr. Lindholm had said just last week after his checkup. "Walt, you're in decent shape, all things considered, but you need to slow down. The cartilage in your knees is thinning, and the arthritis in your hands, well, it's not going to get better. You've worked hard all your life, now you need to rest. Take it easy." Walt had nodded, but inside he'd wanted to scream. He didn't want to slow down. He didn't want to fade away in a recliner, watching reruns and waiting for the next pill schedule. But who was going to stop that slow slide if not him? He picked up one of the small electric motors and turned it over in his hand. There was a precision to it, something clean and forward-looking. He liked that. He pulled out his old magnifier glasses from the junk drawer and studied the blueprint he'd printed the night before. It was a crude design, his version of what an RC Cybertruck might look like. He was no engineer, but he knew how things fit. He knew weight, balance, angles, and torque. He'd driven through snow in Colorado passes and heat waves in the Arizona desert. He'd changed flat tires in the rain and fixed air brakes in sleet. He didn't have to be an engineer to know how to build something that moved. But the real movement, he realized, would have to come from inside him. And that's where it got messy. After an hour of tinkering, his hands started to cramp. The screwdriver slipped and left a small scratch across the metal frame. He winced and shook his hand loose, muttering, "Come on, come on." That's when the phone rang. The screen lit up with the name, Susan Morgan. His daughter-in-law. He stared at it for 2 rings, then 3. He picked it up. "Hey, Susan," he said, trying to sound casual, like it was normal for her to call. "Hi, Walt," she said, her voice polite but clipped. "Listen, I wanted to let you know. Michael and the kids are going to be in town next weekend. They're stopping over on their way to Denver." Walt swallowed. "Are they?" he started, then stopped. "Do you think they'd want to stop by?" "I could, Michael's not sure," she said quickly. "It's been a long time, and, well, he's not sure it's the right thing right now." Walt nodded, forgetting she couldn't see him. "Right," he said softly. "I get it." There was a pause on the line. "I'm not saying it's out of the question," Susan added. "Just, don't be disappointed if he doesn't reach out. Thanks for letting me know, Walt said, his voice steady but drained. After the call ended, he sat there for a long time, staring at the model truck pieces scattered across the table. The tools looked heavier now. The blueprint felt like a joke. He should quit. He should just admit it, he'd missed his chance to be a father, to be useful, to be anything but a cautionary tale. He rubbed his eyes and reached for the TV remote. Maybe a western would help drown it all out. But when he turned on the screen, the channel picked up in the middle of an interview clip. A podcast, actually, some young guy asking Elon Musk why he didn't just play it safe after PayPal. Musk laughed, leaned in, and said, "Safe is the biggest illusion in life. Playing it safe is how you waste it. I'd rather blow it all on something I believe in than die comfortable and full of regret." Walt stared at the screen. Those words punched through the fog like sunlight. Blow it all on something I believe in. He turned off the TV and looked back at the model parts. The Cybertruck wasn't about trucks. It wasn't even about technology. It was about throwing the rulebook out the window and daring the world to catch up. He remembered a younger version of himself behind the wheel of a semi, barreling through rain with bald tires and a busted radio, singing to himself and loving every mile. That guy wasn't afraid to risk it all. When had he stopped being that man? Probably the day Carol died. Probably before that. Slowly, day by day, year by year, traded freedom for routine, motion for stillness, risk for comfort. But comfort was killing him. Slowly. Quietly. He stood up and walked back to the garage. The light was changing, afternoon now. He flipped on the overhead lamp and opened the toolbox, digging until he found the soldering iron. It still worked. Still heated up like it was ready for battle. "All right, toaster truck," he muttered. "Let's see if I can bring you to life." He set the motor into the chassis, hands shaking slightly but more confident now. Piece by piece, screw by screw, wire by wire, it began to resemble something more than junk. Not perfect, not pretty, but purposeful. He worked for hours. Forgot to eat. Lost track of time. When the cramps came, he paused, stretched, then got back to it. He wasn't going to stop this time. Not when he'd just remembered what forward felt like. Not when he had something, anything, worth chasing again. The next morning, Walt awoke with a stiffness that clung to him like wet denim. Every joint protested as he swung his legs over the edge of the bed, and his back reminded him he wasn't 25 anymore, or even 65. But beneath the soreness, there was a hum of energy, something almost boyish, buzzing in his chest. He pulled on his faded jeans, the ones with the hole in the back pocket, and a plain gray t-shirt that had survived hundreds of washes. After a quick rinse and 2 aspirin, he poured himself a mug of burnt coffee, skipped breakfast, and walked straight to the garage. The smell hit him first, metal, sweat, solder. The place felt alive again. The workbench was covered in wires, bolts, diagrams, and the half-assembled shell of a truck that looked nothing like the old diesels he used to love and everything like something out of a science fiction flick. And somehow, that felt right. The little Cybertruck model was taking shape. Its angular shell, crude but promising, gleamed faintly under the overhead bulb. The motor was installed, and yesterday's late-night wiring job had at least managed not to short anything out, though Walt knew he'd have to redo it cleaner if he ever wanted it to actually move. He pulled over the stool, cracked his knuckles, and began to work. The first few minutes were slow, deliberate. Hands remembering what precision felt like. But after half an hour, he found a rhythm. Wire, twist, solder. Screw, fit, file. There was a part of him, the old trucker part, that had always understood machines better than people. Machines didn't lie. They didn't get hurt feelings or carry old grudges. They either worked or they didn't. He'd always found a kind of peace in that. The hours slipped by like miles on an open highway. Around noon, he realized he hadn't eaten. He made a quick sandwich, mustard, turkey, too much black pepper, ate it standing up, and kept going. Around 2 o'clock, his phone buzzed. A text. He didn't get many of those anymore. It was from Susan, just a heads up, we'll be driving through next Saturday afternoon. No promises, but I'll see how Mike feels about stopping in. Walt stared at the screen for a long time. A part of him wanted to reply right away, something casual, like great, hope to see you, but instead, he set the phone down and just let the message sit there. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He couldn't afford to hope too hard. Not yet. Instead, he turned back to the model. The wheels were in place now. The suspension was crude but functional. He tested the battery pack, watching the tiny green light flicker on, then off. It was working. Still plenty to do, but for the first time in years, he had a project that didn't revolve around survival or waiting. This was about building something for no one but himself. Late that night, when the garage grew cold and his shoulders started to ache from hours of bending over the bench, he stood up, stretched, and looked at what he'd made. The shell still needed smoothing. The wiring was messy. But it looked like a truck. His truck. And it reminded him of something Elon had said once. He couldn't remember if it was an interview or a tweet or one of those clips people passed around on YouTube. If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds aren't in your favor. Walt didn't know if this build was important in the grand scheme. But it felt important to him. And maybe that was enough. The next few days followed a new kind of rhythm. Wake up, coffee, garage. Work until the cramps came, then rest. Order more parts online, watch videos on soldering and brushless motors, dig through old drawers for screws he'd sworn he'd thrown away. He was moving again. Not on the highway, but in spirit. Something inside was stretching awake, like a bear after a long winter. He caught himself humming old road songs under his breath. He even cleaned out the fridge, washed the kitchen floor, and finally fixed the leg on that wobbly chair. Not because anyone was coming, but because it felt good to care again. That Wednesday, something unexpected happened. He posted a short video. Just 20 seconds. He used his phone, angled down at the model Cybertruck sitting half-assembled on the workbench. This old man's trying to keep up with Elon, he said, voice raspy and amused. Might not be pretty, but I'll be damned if it won't roll. He didn't expect much. Maybe a few views. But by Thursday morning, he woke up to over 2,000. Someone had shared it on an RC hobby forum. A younger guy had commented. Man, this is awesome. My grandpa was a trucker too. Subbed. Another said, you've got better hands than me, old timer. And that one made him laugh. Old timer. It didn't sting. Not this time. For the first time in a long while, the word felt like a badge. Proof that he'd lasted. That he was still in the game. He posted again that night. A short clip of him testing the motor. It jerked to life and spun the wheels, just for a second, but enough to show it was alive. He called it, First Steps. More comments rolled in. A few people offered advice on how to balance the weight. Another guy sent him a link to a 3D printable Cybertruck shell design. Walt hadn't used a 3D printer in his life, but it didn't matter. He was learning again. He was part of something. Then, on Friday, the email came. It was from someone named Jake Yoon, a producer for a YouTube tech channel called Next Gear Daily. Walt had never heard of it, but apparently they had millions of followers. The message was short and excited, saw your project. This is incredible. Would love to do a short segment or even feature your story. Let me know if you'd be open to chatting. Walt stared at the email for 5 full minutes. Him. On the internet? For building a model truck. The idea made him laugh out loud. But beneath the humor, something else stirred. Something like pride. Not arrogance. Just the simple fact that someone saw him. Not just as a relic, not just a man killing time, but as a builder again. A maker. That night, he wrote a reply. Kept it simple. Thanks for reaching out. Let's talk. He hit send. Then he looked at the nearly finished model on the bench. It was rough around the edges. But it had guts. It had fight. Just like him. And in a world that moved faster every year, filled with voices telling him to slow down, to step aside, to disappear quietly, this project was his way of pushing back. Of saying, I'm still here. I've still got something in me. Maybe even something new. Saturday arrived with a strange weight to it, the kind that settled in Walt's chest before his feet even touched the floor. The morning sun painted a soft rectangle across the wooden floorboards of the hallway as he shuffled into the kitchen, but even the light felt like it was holding its breath. Today was the day. Susan's text echoed in his mind like a heartbeat. Driving through Saturday. No promises. He hadn't heard anything else since. No follow-up. No confirmation. And yet here it was, Saturday. For the first time in years, Walt had cleaned the entire house. Not just a quick sweep, not the surface-level wipe-down he used to do when the guilt got too heavy. He had scrubbed. He had vacuumed. He'd even dusted the top of the doorframes and found a picture of Carol tucked behind the microwave where it must have slipped during one of her rearranging fits. He'd stood there with that picture in his hand for a full 5 minutes. She was laughing in it. Caught mid-laugh, not posing. It hit him harder than he expected. He placed it on the mantel next to the old photo of Michael as a boy, standing beside the wooden model truck they'd built together. The one that started all of this. Now, next to it, stood the nearly completed mini Cybertruck. Shiny, awkward, unfinished, and oddly beautiful. It didn't match the original exactly. It was smaller than a true RC scale, cobbled together from mismatched materials and hours of stubborn work. But it had life. It had character. Walt had spent the previous night getting the steering servo aligned, the wheels calibrated. When the motor engaged, it rolled across the garage floor in a wobbly but determined path, like a toddler learning to walk. He laughed so hard he had to sit down on the workbench to catch his breath. Now it was sitting on the kitchen table like a centerpiece. A conversation piece. He hoped, maybe, just maybe, it would be. By noon, there was still no word from Susan or Michael. Walt stepped outside, the hot August air slapping him in the face like a dish towel fresh from the dryer. The wind was lazy, dragging the heat behind it like an old man dragging a suitcase. He watered the front yard even though the grass hadn't needed it all year. A way to look busy. To keep from pacing. At one point, he caught himself checking his reflection in the front window. His shirt was tucked in. His beard trimmed. He looked, not young, but not as old as he felt most days. He looked like a man who had something to say. A truck rolled past. Not theirs. Then another. Time stretched. He went inside. Saturday. Stood. Checked the fridge. Sat again. 3 o'clock came and went. No text. No knock. No driveway dust. By 4, he was back in the garage, partly to escape the disappointment building in his chest like steam. He didn't want to be bitter. But it hurt. He wasn't mad at Michael. Not really. He understood. Absence had a cost. And Walt had been gone for a lot of years. Not just physically, but emotionally, too. Always a job to do. Always the road calling. He couldn't rewrite it. Couldn't explain away a lifetime of being elsewhere. But this project, this model, this second wind, it was his way of reaching back across the years. A gesture. A signal flare. even if no one saw it. He was pulling out a pack of resistors to recheck the motor load when he heard it. Tires. A crunch in the gravel. Then two doors slamming. He froze. Every cell in his body went on high alert. His heart pounded in his ears. Slowly, he wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward the front door. Through the screen, he saw them. Michael. Taller than he remembered. Leaner. Salt in his beard. Standing next to him were two kids, teenagers. A boy and a girl. The girl looked like Susan. The boy had Walt's eyebrows. Michael looked at the house like it might disappear. Walt opened the door. "Hey," he said. His voice came out quieter than he wanted. Michael nodded. "Hey, Dad." Just like that. 2 words. Like no time had passed. Except all the time had. Walt stepped out onto the porch, and the silence between them was thick, but not angry. Just full. Full of everything not said. "Come in," Walt said finally. "If you've got time." Michael looked at the kids, then back at him. "We've got a few minutes." That's all it took. A few minutes. That's all he needed. They stepped inside, and the air felt electric. The kids looked around like they were entering a museum. Old photos. A house that smelled like wood polish and 1,000 silent dinners. Then the boy's eyes landed on the table. "Whoa. Is that the Cybertruck?" Walt smiled. "Close. It's my version. Made it myself." The boy leaned in. "Does it work?" "See for yourself," Walt said, handing him the controller. The boy gently pushed the joystick. The little truck jerked, then rolled forward. Walt watched his face light up. That was the moment. That flicker. That spark. The girl spoke next. "You made this?" "Sure did. Out of scrap and stubbornness." Michael stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "You've been building again?" "Yeah," Walt said. "Started a few weeks ago. After I saw a clip of Musk showing off the real thing." Michael let out a small laugh. "Figured you'd hate that truck." "I did," Walt admitted. "But then I didn't." Silence again. Then, "It's cool," Michael said. "I didn't expect me to still care about anything." Walt said. The words came out sharper than he meant. Michael shook his head. "No. I didn't know you still had it in you." Walt's voice softened. "Neither did I." Another pause. The kind where something unspoken starts to break. "Why this?" Michael asked. "Why the Cybertruck?" Walt looked at the model. "Because it's not what it's supposed to be. It's ugly. It's bold. People laughed at it. Said it wouldn't work. But somebody built it anyway. And now it's real. I guess I just wanted to see if I could build something that still mattered. Even if it's just a toy." Michael didn't speak. But he nodded. Slowly. Like he understood. Then he walked over to the mantel. Looked at the old photo of him and the wooden truck. "I remember this," he said. "That day in the garage. You let me hammer the wheels on even though I bent one of the nails." Walt smiled. "You painted the fenders red. Said brave trucks need bold colors." Michael laughed. "That sounds like me." Walt's voice caught. "I wish I'd given you more days like that." Michael looked at him. "So do I." They stood there in the quiet. A heavy truth shared without bitterness. The kids were still driving the little truck around the room, laughing as it bumped into the baseboards. And for the first time in decades, the house didn't feel like a museum. It felt alive. Michael walked back toward the door. We've got to get back on the road soon. Of course, Walt said. I'm glad you stopped by. I am too, Michael replied. He paused. Hey, if you finish that truck, maybe send me a video of it running outside. I'll do better than that, Walt said. I'll race you. Michael laughed. We'll see, old man. Walt stood on the porch as the truck pulled away. He watched until the dust settled. Then he looked down at his hands. Still shaking a little. Still rough. Still useful. He walked back inside. The model truck sat slightly askew, one of the tires a bit loose from its unexpected test drive. He tightened it, then fired up the soldering iron. Still more work to do. But something had shifted. He wasn't chasing time anymore. He was chasing connection. And maybe, just maybe, that was the future Musk had been talking about all along. Not just about electric trucks or Mars colonies or AI. But about refusing to rust out quietly. About staying in motion, no matter how old you were. And in that garage, with the hum of heat in the rafters and the sting of solder in the air, Walt Morgan decided he wasn't done building. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Monday started like any other, coffee gone cold too fast, bones stiff from a night spent half dreaming about the past, half worrying about the future. But something in Walt had shifted since Saturday. Not just because Michael had shown up, though that mattered more than he dared admit, but because for the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something again. He kept replaying the image of his grandson's face lighting up as the RC Cybertruck lurched forward, wheels trembling like a newborn deer. That one moment had cracked open something buried deep, a need to build, to be seen, to teach, maybe even to lead. He was already back in the garage before the sun had fully burned through the haze. He'd finished reattaching the front bumper and reinforced the suspension using an old coat hanger and a precision clamp he hadn't touched in years. It wasn't elegant, but it held. The battery housing was now neatly secured under the frame, and after rewiring the ESC unit, the truck had finally hit full power without sputtering out. Walt took it out into the driveway, the surface cracked and uneven from decades of Kansas winters, and placed it gently on the ground. The air was thick with August heat, but he barely noticed. He tapped the remote. The wheels spun. The truck shot forward. Not just a slow crawl, this was speed, the kind that made gravel spit and dust cloud behind it. It whipped around the bend in front of the house and drifted just enough for him to laugh like a kid again. He let it run a few more laps, then scooped it up and set it on the hood of his old F-150, which hadn't moved in months. The contrast was absurd, his rusted, gas-guzzling past, and the strange, futuristic little machine that had somehow become his present. That night, he uploaded another video. This one was a full minute. He called it Old Wheels, New Dreams. No narration, just footage of the truck darting around the driveway, with a little Bob Seger track playing softly in the background. By morning, it had 12,000 views. The comments came fast. Dude, my dad's 67, I just sent this to him. This is the future, young or old, doesn't matter. Just build. I showed this to my grandpa. He says he wants to make one too. Walt read them all. Every single one. Some made him laugh. Some made his eyes sting. The world hadn't forgotten him. He'd just stopped reaching out. But now, people were listening. He received a message from a high school robotics club in Iowa asking if he'd consider doing a Zoom Q&A about the build. Another email came from a woman in Idaho, a retired aerospace machinist, who offered to send him spare parts. A man from Florida, 72, wrote, "You're the reason I pulled my lathe out of the basement again." Walt stared at that one the longest. He'd never imagined that his silly little project, the one he started just to shake off the rust of irrelevance, would inspire anyone else to do anything. It felt like validation, but also responsibility. Maybe he had something worth sharing. Maybe there were thousands like him, waiting for someone their age to show them it wasn't too late to matter. That night, as the wind rattled the back fence and the TV played some forgettable crime drama in the background, Walt sat down at his old laptop and opened a blank page. He titled it, "How I Built My First Cybertruck at 73. He started writing, not like a man writing a manual, but like someone telling a story around a campfire. He described how he stumbled across the Musk interview, how he couldn't shake the image of a vehicle that looked like it came from a comic book, how his hands had failed him at first, how he'd kept going anyway. He wrote about the doubts, the arthritis, the loneliness. About the fear of fading. About Michael. About the truck. The next day, he posted it to a blog he created on a whim, naming it Rolling Forward. It was simple. Just black text on a white background. But by the end of the week, over 50,000 people had clicked through. And then came the message. It was short. 3 lines. No subject. No signature. Just, saw your truck. Bold move. Want to talk? Walt stared at it, blinking. Couldn't be. Was it? He clicked the email address. It was routed through a domain he didn't recognize. He hesitated. Then replied, would love to. Anytime. 24 hours later, he was on a video call with someone from Tesla's outreach team. A woman named Karina, who explained that Elon had indeed seen the video, laughed at the line about building from scrap and stubbornness, and thought the story captured something he'd been trying to say for years, that the future didn't belong to the young, it belonged to the bold. Karina asked if Walt would be open to visiting the Giga Texas facility. Just to look around, she said. Maybe meet a few of the team. Elon might even have a minute if the schedule lines up. Walt stared at the screen. Giga Texas. The real place. The belly of the beast. Sure, he said, trying to sound casual. Why not? He booked a flight that same day. The airport felt alien. Too fast, too loud, too full of people looking down at glowing screens. But he didn't mind. For once, he didn't feel invisible. When he landed in Austin, a driver met him holding a sign, Mr. Morgan. He chuckled at that. Like he was someone. The ride to the factory was smooth, the roads lined with billboards and heat waves shimmering off the asphalt. And then, there it was. Giga Texas. A monument of steel and glass and scale so massive it looked fake. Like something out of a sci-fi dream. Karina met him at the gate. Young, sharp-eyed, talking fast but smiling warmly. Everyone's excited you're here, she said. Honestly, you've lit up a corner of the internet no one expected. She gave him a tour. The robotics, the battery lines, the assembly tunnels that looked like arteries of some giant metallic organism. It was overwhelming, but also thrilling. Everything here pulsed with purpose. It reminded him of being 23, walking onto his first trucking job, scared out of his mind but high on adrenaline. Near the end of the tour, Karina led him into a glass-walled conference room where several people were waiting, laptops open, eyes curious. And then, suddenly, in walked Elon Musk. Wearing a black t-shirt, hands in pockets, like he'd just stepped off the production floor. He nodded at Walt. Heard you built a Cybertruck out of garage scraps, he said. Walt stood, feeling half his age and twice his nerves. Figured I'd beat you to market. Elon grinned. I respect that. They talked for 10 minutes. 15. Maybe 20. About trucks. About legacy. About how hard it is to keep moving when the world wants to slow you down. Walt said, most people my age feel like they missed the boat. Like the future doesn't need us anymore. Elon shook his head. The future needs everyone who's still willing to build it. That line stayed with Walt long after the flight home. He replayed the visit like a movie in his head. And when he walked back into his Kansas garage, the little Cybertruck still sitting proudly on the bench, he didn't feel like an old man with a toy. He felt like a pioneer. Someone who had stepped into the future, shaken its hand, and realized it wasn't just for the young. It was for the restless. The daring. The ones who refused to rust. He opened his blog again. Titled the next post, "You're Never Too Obsolete." And he began to type. 3 weeks after the trip to Giga, Texas, the little Cybertruck had earned a spot on Walt's mantle, right next to the wooden truck Michael had painted red so many years ago. One was made by a young father trying to impress his boy. The other, by an old man trying to reconnect. Together, they told the story of a life lived in steel and silence, mistakes and memories, and now, finally, in motion again. Walt's blog had taken on a life of its own. Each post, filled with humor, stubborn wisdom, and just the right dose of grease-stained insight, reached tens of thousands. Sometimes more. The comments weren't just from fellow retirees, though there were plenty of those. Young people found him too. High school kids curious about motors. College grads burning out on meaningless jobs, hungry for something they could build with their hands. One girl wrote, "My grandpa passed away last year. He used to talk like you. Thank you for reminding me of him." That one stayed with him. But it wasn't the numbers that kept him writing. It was the rhythm. The act of showing up, day after day, building something, even if it was just words, and sending it out into the world. And the world, remarkably, kept writing back. He even started getting packages in the mail. Envelopes full of fan letters. Boxes from strangers, some with custom parts, others with handmade art or photographs of their own projects, all inspired by the old man with the electric truck. One boy from Wyoming sent a drawing of a full-sized Cybertruck that ran on solar panels and had a sleeper cab like the old Peterbilts. "For when you want to drive to Mars," the note said. Walt tacked it above his workbench. It made him grin every time he saw it. One Tuesday morning, while the wind rattled the side panels of the garage and a freight train moaned somewhere in the distance, Walt was soldering a new motor mount when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. But something nudged him, that quiet little instinct that had started whispering more often lately. He wiped his hands, picked up, and said, "Walt here." A voice answered. Older. Steady. "Walt Morgan. This is Hank Wilcox. I run a small fabrication shop just outside Wichita. I don't know if you remember me, but I saw your blog. Used to follow you back in the trucking days, years ago. Your build got me thinking. Would you ever consider doing a segment for a project we're working on? Something different." Walt didn't hesitate. "Tell me more." By the end of the call, Walt had agreed to drive down in 2 days to see what Hank was up to. He packed a bag. Not much, just clean jeans, a fresh flannel, his soldering kit, and the Cybertruck model in a custom foam-lined case he'd rigged from an old toolbox. He hadn't left Kansas in years, but now it was the second time in a month. The drive was smooth, flat, and comforting in that way only Midwestern roads could be, miles and miles of fields that looked like they were holding secrets. He pulled into Hank's lot just after noon on Thursday. The shop was big, functional, no frills. The kind of place that smelled like diesel and new ideas. Hank met him at the door, a thick-set man with calloused hands and a grin that looked permanent. "You look good," Hank said. "You look like hell," Walt shot back, smiling. They laughed. Then Hank said, "Come on. Let me show you why you're here." They walked past lathes, welding tables, half-assembled frames, and a crew of mechanics who gave Walt curious glances. In the back of the shop, under a blue tarp, was something that didn't belong. Hank yanked the tarp back and revealed what looked like a half-sized Cybertruck, but with huge tires, a reinforced body, and a suspension built for off-road chaos. Walt stepped closer. "What am I looking at?" "We call it the Terra Mule," Hank said. Built for extreme terrain. Sand, ice, mountains, places where fuel runs out and regular wheels don't cut it. Hybrid electric. Modeled after your little guy. Walt blinked. You used my design. Adapted it, Hank said. Inspired by it. When I saw your blog, I thought, damn, this guy gets it. Everyone's building sleek. We want rugged. You built rugged. You built heart. Walt ran a hand along the frame. This yours? It's ours, Hank said. If you want it to be. Walt looked at him. What do you mean? I mean I want you to come on board. Help finish it. Advise. Hell, maybe even test drive it. We're not some big shot company. We're just a bunch of guys who think trucks shouldn't be done evolving. We're pitching to some buyers next month. If we can prove the concept, it might be something real. For a long moment, Walt didn't speak. He just stared at the machine in front of him, its matte frame catching the light like a promise. Then he nodded. Let's build it. That night, they worked side by side. Walt, steady with his soldering and calibration tools. Hank, welding joints with muscle memory honed over decades. The younger crew watched them, slowly coming over to ask questions, take notes, offer hands. One of the kids, maybe 19, asked Walt how he learned so much about electric systems. I didn't, Walt said. I just started. That line made its way onto a t-shirt the next week. I just started. Underneath, a sketch of the Cybertruck. By the time the weekend hit, Walt was staying in a small trailer behind the shop, waking at sunrise, falling asleep with sore hands and a full heart. The Terra Mule was coming to life fast. Strong chassis. Responsive controls. Battery cooling that could handle desert heat. It wasn't perfect, but it was bold, exactly what the world needed more of. Exactly what he needed to give. Then came the test run. Sunday morning, 6 a.m. A dried-out dirt field outside Wichita, all ruts and loose gravel. Walt sat behind the wheel, modified for a lower profile, easy grip, no nonsense. Hank stood nearby with a walkie-talkie and a wild look in his eyes. Take it slow, he said. Then take it fast. Walt laughed. Then hit the accelerator. The Terra Mule jerked, groaned, and then surged forward. The torque hit hard, clean. The tires kicked up dust like a rocket launch. He turned hard left, the suspension eating the rough terrain like candy. It was wild, rough, imperfect, and glorious. At one point, Walt howled. Just let out a raw, full-bellied yell as he flew across the field. That sound, the unfiltered joy of someone who thought they'd aged out of joy, echoed across the hills. When he finally stopped, the team rushed over, half laughing, half stunned. Walt climbed out, breathing hard but grinning like a man who'd just flown to the moon. Needs alignment, he said. And a cup holder. Everyone laughed. Hank clapped him on the back. We'll make a driver out of you yet. That night, back in the trailer, Walt stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Not because he was worried. Because he was alive. Every cell. Every scar. Every regret. Buzzing with purpose. For decades, he'd believed his best years were behind him. That the road was done offering anything new. But now, here he was. Leading a project. Inspiring others. Driving prototypes across unpaved earth. And all because he said yes. Said yes to a ridiculous-looking truck. Yes to picking up a soldering iron. Yes to the voice in his head that said, "You're not done." Tomorrow they'd fine-tune the steering. Next week, maybe add solar panels. After that, who knew? Mars, maybe. Or maybe just one more reason to wake up early. Either way, Walt Morgan wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building again. Building trucks. Building stories. Building the kind of legacy that couldn't be parked in a garage. Not now. Not ever. Walt stood outside his garage the following week, blinking up at the sunrise like a man waking from a long, strange dream. There was still dirt in his boots from the Terra Mule test run and a dull ache in his knees that reminded him he wasn't 25 anymore, but he didn't care. He hadn't felt this kind of forward pull in years. Not a memory pulling him backward, but momentum pushing him forward. In the past 2 months, his life had shifted from a quiet loop of coffee, television, and silent dinners to a steady rhythm of building, writing, and somehow, against all odds, inspiring people he'd never even met. The blog had gone viral in ways he couldn't explain. There were now over 200,000 subscribers across platforms. Some called him the Electric Grandpa. Others just called him Walt. He liked that best. Walt. Not Mr. Morgan. Not Sir. Just Walt. A man who picked up a soldering iron and said no to the long fade into nothing. That morning, he posted a video that changed everything. It wasn't planned. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even edited. He just propped up his phone in the garage, stood beside the Cybertruck model, and started talking. Somebody asked me yesterday what I think about getting old, he said, eyes squinting in the Kansas light. And I told them, getting old ain't the problem. It's getting forgotten. He paused. Took a breath. You spend your life building. Working. Raising kids. Trying to keep things from falling apart. And then one day, the phone stops ringing. You become invisible. Hell, some people treat you like you're a piece of furniture that complains too much. He chuckled softly. But let me tell you something. That's a lie. It's a damn lie. Because if you're breathing, you can build. If you're moving, you can matter. I didn't know a damn thing about electric motors or lithium batteries 2 months ago. But I learned. I just started. Because that crazy-looking truck reminded me that boldness doesn't come with a clock. It comes with a decision. He leaned in, voice lowering. You're not too late. You're not too slow. And you're not done. They told me to slow down. I decided to speed up. The screen faded to black, and in white letters, he added one phrase, the garage rebellion has begun. By sundown, the video had over 1 million views. The comments section exploded. Retirees posted photos of their own garage builds, homemade solar panels, custom campers, backyard 3D printers. Grandmothers posted videos of themselves soldering, welding, coding. One woman in Oregon built a miniature SpaceX Falcon rocket and painted Walt's Garage Rebellion down the side. A man in Florida turned his riding mower into an autonomous drone and programmed it to patrol his cul-de-sac at night. A couple in Ohio started a podcast where they interviewed people over 60 who were doing wild things with tech, building vertical farms, creating VR experiences for nursing homes, even designing rocket-themed walking canes. They called it late launchers. Walt couldn't keep up. He tried. He really did. He answered emails late into the night, voice messages into the morning. Every time he thought the wave might slow down, it grew. One night, Susan called. For real this time. Not a text. Not a maybe. A real voice, soft and cautious. Dad, she said. You're trending. Walt laughed. Is that what the kids are calling it now? She hesitated. I watched your video. The one about being forgotten. Her voice cracked a little. It made me cry. Walt's chest tightened. He didn't want to push. But the silence between them had thinned. He could feel it. Susan continued. I think I was angry for a long time. After Mom died, I didn't understand why you shut down. Why you got so small. Walt stared at the garage floor, remembering those long, gray days. I didn't understand either, he said quietly. Grief's funny like that. It is, she said. But this, what you're doing now, it's not small. She paused again. Michael's been reading your blog. The kids too. They think you're famous. Walt smiled, eyes wet. Don't tell them the truth. Let M believe I'm a rock star. Susan laughed, and it sounded like a memory. We were thinking of visiting next month. Staying a few days, if that's okay. Walt didn't answer at first. Just let the warmth spread through his chest like fire in a cold stove. I'd like that, he finally said. A lot. When he hung up, he stared out into the night. The garage light flickered once, then steadied. In the quiet, he whispered to no one in particular, maybe I'm not done yet after all. Over the next week, the movement kept growing. Journalists started calling. First from Wichita. Then Kansas City. Then LA and New York. The term, garage rebellion, hit national headlines. The gray revolution has wheels. How one retired trucker is rewiring America's view of aging. From rust to rockets, Walt's war against irrelevance. He turned down most interviews. Not because he was trying to be mysterious. Just because he didn't want to become a brand. He wanted to stay real. Grounded. Hands in the work. Not on the microphone. But one call caught him off guard. It came from the Musk Foundation itself. Not Tesla. Not SpaceX. The foundation. A woman named Dahlia explained that Elon had seen the Garage Rebellion story take off and was curious, genuinely curious, about what it could become. He's always believed in radical thinking, she said. And your movement proves that courage isn't limited to the young. Walt rubbed his temples. So what are you asking? Dahlia was direct. Would you consider starting a network? A kind of mentorship circle. Old builders teaching young ones. Maybe with a few microgrants from us to help them get started. You'd lead it. Name it. Shape it. Walt exhaled slowly. You want me to be the head of a rebellion? You already are, she said. We just want to support it. Walt didn't answer right away. He stepped out into the garage and looked around. It was still cluttered, still hot, still his. But now it felt like something more. A launch pad. A headquarters. A mission control for people who thought they'd missed their shot. He picked up the Cybertruck model and ran a finger along the roofline. Still a little scratched. Still imperfect. Still his. Tell Elon I'll think about it, he said. But if we do this, we do it my way. No suits. No slogans. Just solder, steel, and second chances. Dahlia smiled through the line. He'd expect nothing less. That night, Walt didn't sleep. He sat in the garage, fan buzzing in the corner, the smell of oil and ozone clinging to the air. He thought about Carol. What she'd say if she saw all this. She always believed in him more than he believed in himself. He thought about Michael, the first time they built something together. And Susan, climbing into the cab of the truck with her tiny pink backpack and asking if she could drive. And he thought about himself. All those years of shrinking, doubting, fading. Until now. Until this. He looked at the blank whiteboard he'd nailed to the back wall a few weeks ago. For ideas. For dreams. He picked up a black marker. And in big, bold letters, he wrote, Rebel Garage, builders of all ages. All heart. No rules. Then underlined it twice. The rebellion had begun. And it wasn't slowing down. By September, the Kansas heat had started to loosen its grip, the golden light of late afternoon casting long shadows across Walt's driveway. The oak tree by the fence had begun to shed, leaves curling into brittle spirals that scattered like forgotten thoughts. But inside Walt's garage, the air pulsed with energy. Not just from soldering irons and motors and machines, but from purpose. And not just his. The first physical proof that Rebel Garage was becoming something real came on a Thursday morning in a rust-streaked FedEx truck. Walt opened the door and found 3 boxes on his porch, each covered in stickers from different states: Montana, Oregon, Louisiana. Inside, handmade tools, letters, schematics, photos of other people's garages, their hands in the work, their hearts lit by the same fuse he'd somehow sparked. One box had a note written in tight cursive: "Dear Walt, my hands don't work like they used to. But I'm teaching my granddaughter how to weld. She's 13. She wants to build a truck that flies. I told her you'd be proud." Walt didn't cry often. But that note cracked him. Because it was more than a thank you. It was proof that his little corner of the world had rippled outward, into homes and hearts and places he would never see. It wasn't fame. It was something deeper. Legacy. Not the kind carved into stone, but the kind passed hand to hand, wrench to wrench. That weekend, Hank drove up from Wichita, his trailer hitched and full of new parts for the Terra Mule prototype. He'd recruited 2 more retirees from the fabrication shop: Frank, who used to build stunt bikes for traveling circuses in the 80s, and Maria, a former NASA technician who'd once assembled parts for the original Mars rover. They were both in their 70s and could outwork anyone half their age. Walt stood in his driveway, arms crossed, watching as they unloaded gear and set up shop beside his garage like they were prepping for a moon landing. "You starting a commune?" he asked. "Nope," Hank said. "We're building a launch pad." The new plan was ambitious. The Terra Mule would go through final tests in late October, and then they'd take it on the road. Literally. A cross-country tour, stopping at schools, tech fairs, community centers, showing people what could happen when experience met audacity. The trip had a name now: the Map They Never Drew Tour. It came from something Walt had written in one of his early blog posts. "The older I get, the more I realize the map they gave us was incomplete. They told us where to go when we were young. Told us when to settle down, when to retire, when to fade. But they never drew the part where we come alive again." That line had been quoted 1,000 times. Painted on walls, printed on shirts, even tattooed, someone from Colorado sent a photo of the words inked along his forearm. Walt shook his head every time he saw it. He wasn't trying to be a prophet. He was just telling the truth. In October, the garage became a command center. Walt's neighbor, June, who'd mostly just waved from a distance for years, started bringing casseroles and sweet tea for the crew. She'd lost her husband in 2020 and said it was nice hearing voices and laughter through the fence again. "It reminds me of the old days," she said, handing Walt a pie. "Before everything got so quiet." He nodded, understanding too well. Then one afternoon, as they were testing new solar panel alignments on the Terra Mule's roof, Michael showed up. No warning. No call. Just a 12-year-old with a backpack and that unmistakable Morgan squint. Walt looked up from his drill and froze. "Hey," he said softly. "Mom dropped me off," Michael said, adjusting the strap on his shoulder. "She said I could hang out for a few hours if it's okay." Walt felt something shift in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it's more than okay." They worked side by side all afternoon. Walt gave him a small task, assembling a new drone sensor prototype for the Terra Mule, and watched quietly as the boy focused, hands steady, eyes sharp. Later, when they sat on the garage steps eating ham sandwiches and pickles, Michael said, "Are you really going to drive across the country in that thing?" Walt nodded. "That's the plan." "Can I come?" Walt turned to him, surprised. "What about school?" Michael shrugged. "I could do online stuff." Mom said maybe. She said she'd think about it. Walt looked away for a moment, swallowing emotion he didn't want to spill. "If she says yes, I'd like that," he said. "A lot." Michael smiled, then stood and went back inside the garage. Walt stayed on the steps, staring at the sky, the setting sun painting the clouds in wild oranges and deep purples. He thought of all the roads he'd driven in his life. All the highways he'd traveled under blinking stars, chasing deliveries, chasing time. But this was the first road that felt like it was chasing him back. By mid-October, the Terra Mule was ready. The final version was stronger, smarter, and sleeker than anything Walt had imagined. It had solar wings that folded like origami when not in use. Tires that could adjust pressure automatically based on terrain. A cockpit that felt more like a spaceship than a truck. And on the front, just below the reinforced windshield, a custom badge Hank had made out of old scrap metal. It read, RG-01. Rebel Garage, Prototype 1. Walt ran his fingers over the letters. They were welded unevenly, imperfectly, but with love. Like all great first drafts. The launch party was set for October 28, the same day Walt had turned 74. Susan planned it. "You need a birthday worth remembering," she said over the phone. "Something wild." "What, like skydiving?" he joked. "Don't tempt me," she replied. The party was modest but full of life. Neighbors brought folding chairs and lawn games. Kids buzzed around the Terra Mule, touching its panels and asking if it could fly. Michael gave impromptu tours, beaming with pride as he pointed to different features. "My grandpa built this," he said to anyone who'd listen. Walt, for once, didn't deflect the praise. He just stood beside the truck, hands in his pockets, letting it wash over him. Later that evening, as dusk fell and fireflies blinked into view, Susan handed him a small box. Inside was a keychain. Silver. Shaped like a rocket. Engraved with the words, "The map is yours now." Walt didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just hugged her. Held her tight. That night, long after the guests had left and the music had faded, Walt stood alone in the garage. The Terra Mule was parked in the center, bathed in soft light. On the whiteboard, beside all the project notes and scribbles, someone, maybe Hank or Michael, had written, "Launch, November 1st. Underneath, in smaller writing, "Let's draw the rest of the map." Walt stared at it for a long time. Then picked up the marker. And wrote one word beneath it, "Together." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? November arrived with a chill that swept across Kansas like a wake-up call, a reminder that winter was waiting just beyond the horizon. Walt woke early on the first morning of the Map They Never Drew tour, his breath misting in the garage as he stood beside the Terra Mule. The truck gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead lights, every panel, every rivet a testament to months of stubborn hope and relentless hands. His fingers brushed over the steering wheel, worn leather soft from long use, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat but an open road. Michael was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, his tablet glowing with maps and routes and weather reports. Susan was packing snacks in the corner, humming a tune Walt hadn't heard in years. "Ready, old man?" Michael called out, grinning. Walt smiled back. "I don't know if I ever was. But I am now." Outside, neighbors gathered, some holding cameras, others just stopping by to watch the departure. June handed Walt a thermos of coffee and a small envelope. "For the road," she said, her eyes bright. Walt nodded, touched. He was starting to see these moments, the warmth of community, the human connection, as fuel just as important as batteries and bolts. At 8 a.m., with a crowd of 50 waving and cheering, the Terra Mule roared to life. The electric motor hummed, smooth and confident, a sound that felt like promise. Walt put the truck in gear, glanced in the rearview mirror, and saw Susan waving with tears shining on her cheeks. Michael gave a thumbs up from the passenger seat. Then, slowly, the truck rolled forward, and with it, Walt crossed the threshold from what had been to what could be. The first leg of the journey took them eastward through winding highways and sleepy towns still cloaked in autumn gold. They stopped at small schools and community centers, places where Walt shared his story, the lost years, the risk of fading away, and the courage to start again. Each stop drew more curious faces, eager hands wanting to touch the truck, ask questions, learn. At one school in rural Missouri, a group of teenagers crowded around, eyes wide as Walt explained how Tesla's electric innovation inspired him. "I never thought about trucks this way before," said a girl named Lily, her voice bursting with excitement. "It's like the future's already here, and we just have to grab it." Moments like that lit a fire inside Walt, reminding him why he'd started this rebellion in the first place, not just for himself but for anyone who'd ever felt left behind. The tour was more than a test run for a prototype, it was a message. Age was not a cage but a catalyst. At night, they camped in fields under vast, star-studded skies. Michael sprawled on the tailgate, eyes tracing constellations, while Walt and Susan leaned on each other, letting silence speak their shared awe. One evening near St. Louis, after a long day of demos and laughter, Walt pulled out the envelope June had given him. Inside was a folded letter and a small, worn photograph. The letter was from a woman named Evelyn, a retired engineer from Detroit who had stumbled on Walt's blog months earlier. She wrote about her own years of doubt and loss after the factory she worked at shut down, about nights spent wondering if her skills still mattered. "Your story," she wrote, "gave me the courage to start building again. I've been designing battery modules in my basement, and I hope to send you some prototypes soon. Maybe we can build something together." The photograph was of Evelyn in her workshop, surrounded by tools and blueprints, her smile fierce and real. Walt felt a lump in his throat. This was the map they'd never been given, the one that showed paths not just to new places but new lives. It was a network. A community. A rebellion against the narrative that age meant the end. Days blurred into weeks. The tour rolled on through bustling cities and quiet farms, across highways that cut through cornfields and amber waves of grain. They met more people like Evelyn, retirees becoming pioneers, skeptics turning into believers. They shared meals cooked over campfires, stories swapped like treasures in the dark. But the journey wasn't without challenges. The Terra Mule encountered its share of glitches, software bugs that caused the dashboard lights to flicker, charging stations that were harder to find than promised, unexpected storms that tested the truck's solar panels. Walt found himself sleepless more nights than not, running diagnostics by the glow of his laptop, his fingers trembling with frustration and fatigue. Yet every setback was met with determination. "Failure's just feedback," Walt reminded his crew, borrowing a phrase from Elon Musk himself. "We fix it, we learn, and we keep going." Michael proved to be an invaluable helper, his tech-savvy mind quick to troubleshoot and adapt. Susan managed communications, juggling emails, social media, and press inquiries with a grace that kept the rebellion grounded. One afternoon in Denver, as the group gathered to celebrate a successful repair, Walt caught a news alert on his phone. Elon Musk had tweeted about the Terra Mule tour. Inspired by the spirit of those who refuse to fade away, the tweet read, "Age is an advantage if you choose to use it. Keep pushing boundaries." The message sent a ripple of excitement through the crew. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #RebelGarage and #NeverTooOld trending nationwide. The movement was no longer just a local spark, it was a wildfire spreading across the country. But with attention came pressure. Some critics scoffed, calling it a gimmick. Others questioned whether a man in his 70s should be chasing dreams instead of enjoying retirement. Walt read the comments with a mixture of irritation and resolve. "Let them talk," he said one morning, the sun warming his face as he worked on the Terra Mule's dashboard. "They don't know what it's like to stare down the barrel of invisibility and decide to fight." The emotional weight of the tour pressed on him in quieter moments. He missed Carol fiercely, felt the pangs of old regrets, and struggled with the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he was rewriting his story too late. One night near Kansas City, as the crew set up camp, Michael sat beside Walt by the fire, poking at embers with a stick. "Grandpa," he said softly, "do you think I can do something like this when I'm old?" Walt smiled, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "You're going to do more than this, kid. You're going to change the map for everyone behind you." They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling as stars wheeled overhead. The road ahead was long, uncertain, but alive with possibility. For Walt, the journey was no longer about proving something to the world. It was about proving it to himself. That the horizon was not a limit but an invitation. That life after 60, 70, even 75 was a frontier worth exploring. As the Terra Mule rolled toward its next stop, Walt glanced at the fading Kansas landscape one last time. The old roads he'd traveled were behind him now. Ahead was the vast, uncharted future, the map they never drew, but one he was helping to create. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid. The early November chill seemed to seep not just into the bones but into the spirit. After weeks on the road, the initial excitement around the Terra Mule tour began to settle, revealing a quieter, heavier side of the journey. Walt felt it in the mornings when he woke stiff and slow, the aches sharper than before. He felt it in the silence between conversations, where hope sometimes struggled to drown out the echo of old fears. The map they never drew was becoming more than a physical route, it was an emotional battleground. The crowds and applause that once energized him started to feel distant, replaced by moments when the old questions crept back in, louder than before. Is this really worth it? Am I chasing a dream that's already out of reach? Michael, as young as he was, seemed to notice the change. One afternoon in a small diner in Oklahoma City, the boy asked, "Grandpa, do you ever get scared that this might not work? That people won't care?" Walt stirred his coffee slowly, looking out the window at the gray sky. "Every day," he admitted. "But the trick isn't not feeling scared. It's deciding not to let fear stop you." Susan was the first to voice concerns about the toll the tour was taking on Walt's health. She noticed his slower steps, the way he winced when he bent to inspect the truck, the nights when he barely slept, haunted by the weight of responsibility. One evening, as they camped just outside Tulsa, she pulled him aside. "You're not a machine, Walt," she said gently. "You have to pace yourself." He nodded but didn't promise. This was different than the physical exhaustion from decades on the road delivering freight. This was a weariness that came from pushing against something much bigger, the years, the loss, the creeping doubt that maybe the world was moving too fast for a man his age to keep up. They arrived in Dallas under steel-gray skies and biting wind, the city's skyline sharp and distant against the horizon. The tour's momentum was slowing, and with fewer stops planned, the crew found themselves in stretches of silence, the hum of the Terra Mule's motor a constant companion. At a local makerspace, Walt met a young engineer named Tyler who was fascinated by the project but skeptical of the old-school approach. "I admire what you're doing," Tyler said, eyes bright behind thick glasses. "But the future's digital, fast, and connected. How do you compete with that when your team is, well, let's just say, vintage?" The comment stung, and Walt felt the familiar burn of invisibility, the unspoken assumption that youth equaled relevance and experience equaled obsolescence. "We compete," Walt replied quietly, "by proving that wisdom and grit still have a place. That innovation isn't just about age, it's about courage." Tyler smiled, nodding slowly. "Maybe you're right." But the seed of doubt lingered. That night, back at the hotel, Walt lay awake, the ceiling fan's slow spin matching the rhythm of his restless thoughts. Had he been too stubborn? Had he risked too much chasing a vision that might never catch fire? Meanwhile, the world outside seemed to be accelerating, new tech unveiled, social media buzz growing louder, younger voices dominating the conversation. Walt felt like a whisper trying to be heard in a storm. Then came the call from the doctor. It wasn't urgent, but it was a reminder, his heart needed rest. The stress and physical strain were pushing him into dangerous territory. "You have to slow down," the doctor said kindly but firmly. "Your health has to come first." Walt sat with the words for days. The question that had haunted him for months, "Is it too late?" now felt like a shadow looming larger than ever. He thought of Carol, of the life they'd dreamed of but never fully built. He thought of the long nights spent alone, the years lost to fear and doubt. Was this the moment to stop? To give up and accept the quiet? But then he remembered Elon Musk's voice from that night months ago, echoing in his mind, "If something's important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The words ignited a flicker deep inside. Maybe this wasn't about winning or losing. Maybe it was about refusing to fade away without a fight. Walt decided to keep going, but with new boundaries. He would listen to his body, lean on his team, and accept help. The journey was no longer a solo rebellion, it was a collective mission. The next few days were a test of balance. Walt pushed himself, yes, but also rested when needed. Susan and Michael stepped up more, handling logistics, media, and repairs. The crew's bond grew stronger, a family forged by shared purpose and mutual care. One afternoon in Little Rock, Walt received an unexpected message from an old friend, Tommy, his former partner from the trucking days, who had disappeared years ago after a bitter falling out. The message was simple: "I've been watching. Proud of you. Maybe we can talk." Walt stared at the screen, heart pounding. The weight of past regrets collided with a fragile hope for reconciliation. He typed back, "Let's meet." The reunion was tentative but healing. Tommy was older now, lines etched deep by time and hardship, but his eyes held a spark of the man Walt once knew. They talked for hours, sharing stories of failure and forgiveness. Tommy admitted his own fears of being left behind. Walt realized they were both prisoners of the same cage, the lie that age meant irrelevance. That night, Walt felt lighter. The map was no longer just a path forward, it was a bridge back to connection. Yet, even as the tour moved into its final weeks, the shadow of doubt lingered. In a small town outside Nashville, a local reporter asked Walt if he feared the movement might die when the tour ended. Walt hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But maybe it's not about a movement. Maybe it's about a mindset. A choice. We each decide whether to fade or to fight." The reporter's eyes sparkled with understanding. Walt realized then that the story he'd been telling wasn't just his own. It belonged to every person who'd ever felt too old to matter, too tired to try. As November deepened and the tour wound down, Walt stood on a ridge overlooking the Tennessee Valley, the sunset painting the sky in fiery reds and soft purples. The Terra mule rested nearby, silent but ready. He thought about the journey, not just the miles traveled, but the miles yet to go. The doubt was still there, but it no longer felt like a chain. It was a reminder to keep moving, to keep daring. To cross the horizon again and again, no matter the weight. The Terra mule's tires hummed steadily as Walt navigated the winding roads near Asheville, North Carolina. The autumn leaves blazed fiery reds and golds, a dazzling contrast to the steel and circuitry that powered his rebellious machine. The tour was nearing its end, but something electric buzzed beneath the surface, a feeling Walt hadn't experienced since his first big rig rollout decades ago: anticipation. That morning, as the crew prepared to demonstrate the truck's latest upgrade, a new regenerative braking system designed by Evelyn and her team, Walt's hands trembled slightly. Not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of what this moment could mean. Months ago, Evelyn's letter had felt like a lifeline thrown across the abyss of doubt. Now, her work was real, integrated into the very heart of the Terra mule. Michael was beside him, adjusting sensors, while Susan checked their live stream setup. "Ready?" Walt asked quietly. "More than ever," Michael replied, eyes shining. The crowd gathered at the local innovation center was a mix of curious townsfolk, industry insiders, and some surprise guests, news crews, investors, and even a few Tesla engineers intrigued by the grassroots project. Walt felt their eyes on him, some skeptical, others hopeful. The moment the truck's motor engaged, a low, confident hum filled the air. The regenerative brakes engaged smoothly as Walt eased the truck down a steep hill, energy flowing back into the battery, extending range and efficiency. The demonstration was flawless, and the crowd erupted into applause. For Walt, it was more than a technical win, it was a symbol. A reminder that innovation didn't belong exclusively to the young or the corporate giants. It belonged to those brave enough to take risks, to learn, to adapt. Later that day, as the excitement simmered into a warm glow, Walt found himself alone with Evelyn's latest prototype module. He held it carefully, marveling at the delicate balance of science and hope it represented. His phone buzzed. A text from Elon Musk, impressed by your progress. Keep pushing. Age is just a number, vision is everything. Walt smiled, the words fueling his resolve. But breakthroughs rarely come without shadows. That evening, as the crew settled into their modest cabin rental, Walt received an urgent call from Susan. There had been a glitch in the new software update, one that caused intermittent power surges and risked damaging the battery. Panic flickered in Walt's chest. Months of work could be undone in a moment. Yet he refused to surrender to fear. "We'll fix it," he said, voice steady. "We always do." Over the next 24 hours, the team worked feverishly, troubleshooting code and rerouting circuits. The air was thick with tension and exhaustion, but also an unspoken bond, a shared defiance against the odds. At dawn, after countless cups of coffee and blurry-eyed debugging, Michael announced they'd isolated the fault, a simple compatibility error between Evelyn's module and the original Tesla software base. Walt felt a surge of relief, but also pride. This was no longer a solo fight. It was a collaboration of generations, minds, and dreams. That afternoon, they took the Terra Mule out for another test drive. The truck responded perfectly, the upgraded system running smoother than ever. Walt felt the surge of victory mingle with the cool mountain air. As they drove through the misty hills, he realized the breakthrough wasn't just technical, it was personal. He had crossed a threshold from doubt to confidence, from isolation to community. The news spread quickly. Social media exploded with stories of the Terra Mule's progress. Messages poured in from people across the country, retirees, engineers, dreamers, thanking Walt for reminding them that it's never too late to start again. In a small diner that night, surrounded by his team and new friends, Walt raised a glass. "To the future," he said, voice thick with emotion. "To the risk-takers, the stubborn, the ones who refuse to fade away." Michael grinned. "And to Grandpa, who taught me that age is just another word for experience." Walt smiled, feeling a deep warmth that no winter chill could touch. Outside, the world was changing. And so was he. The glow of the breakthrough in Asheville hadn't faded when the backlash began. Walt had expected resistance, change was rarely welcomed with open arms, but the intensity surprised him. Headlines in trade magazines questioned the wisdom of a septuagenarian leading an electric truck revolution. Social media was flooded with doubters branding the project a nostalgic folly and retirement hobby gone public. One viral video featured a well-known tech commentator laughing off the Terra Mule as a charming but hopeless experiment. The sting of criticism cut deep. Walt felt the old familiar ache of invisibility creeping back, whispering that he was too late, too slow, too irrelevant. Yet, as he sat in the dim light of the hotel room, scrolling through the angry comments, a quote flashed in his mind, one from Elon Musk's 2014 interview, where Elon said, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Walt's fingers paused above the keyboard, then typed a short reply on Twitter, "Age is not a barrier. It's a battleground. The future belongs to those who fight for it every day." The response was immediate. Supporters rallied, sharing their own stories of late-life reinvention, pushing back against the cynics. Walt's phone buzzed relentlessly, emails, messages, calls from people inspired by his defiance. Even some critics softened, intrigued by the raw honesty behind the rebellion. At a town hall event in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Walt faced his toughest crowd yet, a room filled with industry veterans and trucking executives skeptical of the electric truck's viability and, more pointedly, of Walt's capacity to lead the charge. Questions came fast and sharp. How can an old-timer understand the demands of modern logistics? What makes you think this old truck can compete with the latest tech giants? Is this just a personal hobby or a serious business? Walt listened carefully, feeling the weight of each doubt, then spoke slowly, with calm conviction. I've been on these roads for over 50 years. I know what it means to deliver not just freight but reliability, hope, and grit. This isn't a hobby. It's a necessity, because the future of trucking can't be built on nostalgia or fear. It has to be built on courage and innovation, at any age. The room was silent, the challenge hanging thick in the air. Then a slow applause began, tentative at first, then growing. Walt felt a swell of emotion, a moment of truth where the old guard met the new wave of possibility. Outside the hall, a group of young engineers approached, eager to collaborate rather than compete. Among them was Sarah, a software developer who had been quietly following Walt's journey online. "Your story gave me permission to try again," she said. "I'm working on AI systems for autonomous vehicles, and I want to help make this truck smarter, safer." Walt's smile was genuine. The rebellion was no longer solitary. It was becoming a movement, a fusion of generations and ideas. Yet, not all moments were victories. The physical strain continued to test Walt. One morning in Nashville, a sharp chest pain forced him to the hospital, where doctors cautioned him to slow down. "Your heart is showing signs of stress," the cardiologist warned. "You need rest, or the risks will only grow." That night, lying in the sterile hospital bed, Walt confronted his deepest fear. That his body might betray the dream he'd fought so hard to revive. But the fire inside wouldn't dim. He called Susan and Michael, telling them he'd take a short break but was determined to return. "This is bigger than me," he said. "We're rewriting the rules, not just for one man but for everyone who's ever been told they're too old to matter." The break gave Walt time to reflect and recharge. He revisited old journals, letters from Carol, and even some of the early blueprints he'd drawn in his 20s. The past, he realized, was not a chain but a foundation. Every failure, every heartbreak, every lonely mile had built the man he was today, a man ready to face the future with open eyes and a stubborn heart. When Walt finally rejoined the team, the atmosphere had shifted. New partnerships were forming, funding was secured from unexpected sources, and the Tesla engineers had invited them for a joint workshop to refine the software. The critics were still there, but they no longer dominated the narrative. The story had changed. Walt's journey had become proof that innovation wasn't a young person's game and that courage didn't expire with age. As the Terra Mule prepared for its final demonstration before a panel of investors and media, Walt stood tall, aware of every ache and doubt but refusing to be defined by them. The truck rolled out into the sunlight, a symbol not just of technology but of resilience and hope. In that moment, Walt knew the rebellion was just beginning. The day began like any other on the Terra Mule tour, the sun rising soft and golden over the sleepy town of Greenville, South Carolina. But beneath the calm surface, a quiet excitement buzzed through Walt's veins. Today, he was meeting someone who could change everything, someone whose arrival could bring new fuel to the fire he'd been stoking for months. The small conference room at the Greenville Innovation Hub was surprisingly modern, the glass walls reflecting sunlight onto rows of sleek tech prototypes and 3D printers humming softly in the background. Walt settled into his chair, a little stiff from the long drive, as the door opened and a woman entered, a striking figure with confident strides and eyes that sparkled with both intelligence and warmth. "Walt, it's a pleasure," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Jessica Reynolds, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Tesla." Walt's heart skipped. Tesla. The name carried weight. A titan of innovation, the very company that had inspired his project from the start. But more than that, it was a symbol of legitimacy. If Tesla was willing to sit at the table, maybe the Terra Mule's future wasn't just a dream. Jessica smiled, sensing his hesitation. "I've been following your journey," she said. "Your determination to push the boundaries, especially in an industry as traditional as trucking, is impressive." Walt nodded. "It's been a long road, full of doubt and resistance. But we're getting there." Over the next hour, they talked openly, about technology, challenges, and the vision for electric freight transport. Jessica shared Tesla's interest in expanding the reach of sustainable vehicles and how the Terra Mule's grassroots spirit aligned with their mission to accelerate the world's transition to clean energy. Walt listened, absorbing the possibilities. "We're exploring ways to collaborate," Jessica explained. "Sharing resources, co-developing systems, even leveraging Tesla's supercharger network to support your fleet." For Walt, the offer felt like a turning point, not just for the project, but for himself. The alliance meant more than money or technology, it was an acknowledgement that age and experience could still command respect in the fast-moving world of innovation. Later, as Walt walked outside with Michael and Susan, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "This could be the start of something big," Susan said, squeezing his arm. Michael grinned. "See? Old school and new school, working together." But the partnership came with new challenges. Tesla's pace was relentless, their expectations high, and Walt's team had to adapt quickly. Evelyn and the engineers dove into intensive workshops, integrating Tesla's AI and battery technologies into the Terra Mule while ensuring the system remained rugged and practical for real-world trucking demands. The clash of cultures sometimes sparked tension, Tesla's sleek Silicon Valley style versus Walt's hands-on, road-tested approach. Yet, through compromise and mutual respect, they forged a unique synergy. One afternoon, Jessica pulled Walt aside. "You've built more than a truck," she said quietly. "You've built a movement. People are watching, retirees, veterans, engineers, looking for proof that innovation has no expiration date." Walt felt a lump in his throat. "I never imagined this. I just wanted to prove I wasn't finished." Jessica smiled. "Sometimes, proving that is the biggest innovation of all." Outside the tech hub, word of the Tesla collaboration spread fast. Industry media and local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the narrative of resilience, risk, and reinvention. Investors who had once been cautious now saw the project in a new light, fueling fresh rounds of funding. The Terra Mule's tour expanded, reaching cities across the southeast, showcasing not only the truck's evolving capabilities but the growing team behind it, a multi-generational group united by grit and vision. But with growth came growing pains. Walt's health continued to be a concern, the stress of travel and endless meetings wearing on his aging body. Susan urged him to delegate more, but Walt struggled to let go. "This is my dream," he insisted. "I have to see it through." Yet, deep down, he knew the truth: to keep fighting, he needed to trust others. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in Charleston, Walt sat quietly on the porch of their rental house. Michael joined him, the boy's youthful energy a balm against the weight of years. "Grandpa," Michael said softly, "you're not alone in this. We're a team now." Walt smiled, eyes misty. "I'm learning that." The night sky stretched wide, stars blinking in silent encouragement. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Walt felt the thrill of partnership, the power of a new alliance, one that could turn a risky bet into a legacy that outlived him. The days grew shorter as winter crept into the south, and Walt found himself at a crossroads he hadn't fully anticipated. The Terra Mule project was gaining momentum, the alliance with Tesla deepening, and the future looked brighter than it had in years. But beneath the surface, a quieter, more personal battle simmered. Walt's body was sending him unmistakable signals, fatigue lingered longer, and small aches became sharper reminders of time's toll. Susan had been gentle but firm, urging him to slow down, to think about the life beyond the project. "Walt," she said one evening as they sat by the fire in their rental cabin near Knoxville, "you've poured your soul into this. But what happens if you can't keep going?" He looked into her eyes and felt the gravity of the question. For so long, the fight had been about proving he wasn't done, that age wasn't a limit. But now, the possibility of stepping back was no longer a defeat but a new kind of courage. Michael, too, noticed the change. "Grandpa," he said during one of their long drives testing the latest software updates, "you've taught me how to face fear. Maybe it's time to face the fear of letting go." Walt nodded, torn between the desire to push forward and the need to protect himself. The project had become more than just a mission, it was his legacy. Yet, as he reviewed the latest telemetry data and design blueprints late one night, a thought struck him: what if the true legacy was in the people he inspired? That idea crystallized during a meeting with Jessica Reynolds and Tesla's senior engineers in Palo Alto. They were discussing the final phase of the Terra Mule's production timeline when Jessica surprised Walt with a proposal. "We want to bring you on as an advisor," she said. "Someone to help guide the project with your experience, but without the daily grind." It was an offer both honor and challenge, a chance to stay involved but step back from the exhausting pace. Walt felt a rush of relief mixed with hesitation. Could he trust others to carry the torch? The answer came during a late-night phone call with Evelyn. "You've built something bigger than any one person," she said. "We're ready to carry it forward, Walt. You don't have to do it all." The words unlocked something in him. The fight wasn't about solo glory, it was about building a movement that lasted. Back home in Asheville, Walt began to delegate more, trusting Michael and Susan to take on leadership roles. He found joy in mentoring rather than micromanaging, sharing stories of setbacks and triumphs, lessons learned from decades on the road and in the workshop. The Terra Mule team thrived under this new dynamic, the blend of youthful energy and seasoned wisdom propelling the project into its final testing stages. But not all challenges were technical or personal. Industry politics reared their head in unexpected ways. A powerful trucking association, threatened by the disruptive potential of electric trucks, launched a campaign to discredit the Terra Mule, labeling it unproven and impractical. The media blitz cast a shadow over recent progress, stirring doubt among some investors and partners. Walt refused to be silenced. In an open letter published online, he addressed the controversy head-on. Progress has always faced resistance from those clinging to the past. We're not just building trucks, we're building hope, sustainability, and opportunity for future generations. The letter went viral, sparking a wave of public support. Retirees, environmentalists, truckers, and tech enthusiasts rallied behind the cause, turning the tide once more. Then came the defining moment, the Terra Mule's official launch event, set for a sprawling logistics hub in Atlanta. The air buzzed with anticipation as industry leaders, media, and supporters gathered. Walt stood backstage, heart pounding, aware this was both a culmination and a new beginning. When his name was called, he walked to the podium with steady steps, greeted by warm applause. He spoke not just of trucks or technology, but of resilience, reinvention, and the power of belief. "I was told I was too old to matter," he said, voice strong. "But age is not an obstacle, it's a testament to endurance. This truck represents every person who refuses to fade away." The Terra Mule rolled out, gleaming under the lights, a symbol of risk, hope, and change. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Walt felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced the crossroads, and chosen to embrace the future on his own terms. The months after the launch were a whirlwind of activity, but Walt felt a steady calm settling inside him, like a ship finally finding harbor after a long voyage. The Terra Mule was no longer just a concept, it was on the road, delivering freight and turning heads across the country. The partnership with Tesla had blossomed into something deeper, and Walt's role had shifted from relentless leader to wise advisor. He spent mornings with the younger engineers, sharing insights from decades of experience, and afternoons in quiet reflection, savoring moments he had long thought lost. Susan and Michael had taken on more responsibility, each finding their own rhythm within the project. Michael's youthful optimism and tech-savvy balanced Walt's practical wisdom, while Susan's organizational skills kept the complex machine running smoothly. One afternoon, as Walt toured a warehouse where the Terra Mule fleet was being maintained, Michael pulled him aside. "Grandpa, there's something I want to show you." They stepped into a small workshop where a group of young apprentices were hard at work, learning the intricacies of electric truck maintenance and software updates. "This," Michael said with pride, "is the next generation. They're hungry to learn, and they see what you started as more than just a truck. It's a movement." Walt watched as one apprentice carefully adjusted a circuit board, her hand steady and sure. The scene stirred something deep within him, a powerful reminder that his fight was never just about himself but about those who would come after. That evening, back at the cabin, Walt sat with Susan and Michael by the fire. The conversation turned to legacy, not the kind carved in stone or headlines, but the living, breathing kind made of relationships and shared dreams. "I always thought I had to prove something," Walt admitted, voice low. "Now I see it's about planting seeds. Not all of them will bloom in my time, but they will." Susan smiled, squeezing his hand. "You've already changed more lives than you know." As the seasons shifted into spring, the Terra Mule project expanded its reach, partnering with logistics companies eager to embrace clean energy. The trucks rolled steadily along highways, their quiet hum a sign of a new era in American trucking. Walt found joy in the simple pleasures, watching the sunrise, feeling the wind on his face during test drives, and sharing meals with the team that had become family. Yet, the fight was far from over. New challenges emerged: supply chain disruptions, regulatory hurdles, and the relentless pressure to innovate faster. Walt faced these obstacles with the same stubborn resolve that had carried him through the darkest days. In quieter moments, he found strength in Elon Musk's words echoing in his mind. "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." One afternoon, as Walt sat reviewing reports, his phone buzzed with a video call from Elon himself. "Walt," Elon greeted him with a warm smile, "I've been watching your progress. It's impressive what you've accomplished." Walt chuckled softly. "I couldn't have done it without your spark." Elon nodded. "Remember, the future belongs to those willing to take risks, at any age. Keep pushing the boundaries." The conversation left Walt energized, a renewed fire burning in his chest. Later that week, at a conference in Detroit, Walt was invited to speak alongside industry leaders and innovators. On stage, he shared his journey, not just the technical triumphs but the personal battles, the fears of fading away, and the power of refusing to quit. The audience listened intently, many wiping tears as Walt spoke of resilience and reinvention. Afterward, a young woman approached him. "Your story gave me hope," she said. "I'm 68 and thinking about starting a new career. You showed me it's never too late." Walt smiled, the words a balm to his soul. Back home, as twilight bathed the mountains, Walt stood on the porch, watching Michael and Susan prepare for the next phase of the project. He felt a quiet pride, a man who had risked everything and found a future worth fighting for. The torch had been passed, but the flame would keep burning, lighting the way for those who dared to dream beyond their years. Winter had returned, painting the Appalachian foothills in frost and muted light, and with it came a new set of challenges that tested Walt and the Terra Mule team in ways no one had anticipated. Just as the electric trucks were proving their worth on the roads, an unexpected storm brewed on the horizon, not of weather, but of finances and faith. Investors, initially enthusiastic, began to grow cautious. The global supply chain woes tightened their grip, causing delays in battery shipments and component shortages. Tesla, juggling its own ambitious projects, hinted at scaling back its involvement. Walt watched the news with a sinking heart. Headlines spoke of uncertain futures and innovation roadblocks. It felt like the world was conspiring to push the Terra Mule back into obscurity, just when it had begun to shine. The weight of the setbacks pressed down on Walt's aging shoulders. Some nights, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the fear that the project might crumble before it truly began. Yet, even in the darkest moments, a spark refused to die. He thought back to the early days of Tesla, when Elon Musk faced near bankruptcy and public doubt, how he had kept pushing despite overwhelming odds. Walt clung to that example, repeating Elon's words like a mantra: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. Determined to fight back, Walt convened an emergency team meeting in Asheville. The room buzzed with tension but also resolve. "We've come too far to quit now," Walt declared, his voice steady despite the storm within. "This is when we dig deeper, get smarter, and push harder. Innovation is messy, and setbacks are part of the process." The team rallied, brainstorming creative solutions, sourcing alternative materials, redesigning components to be more efficient, and tapping local suppliers to bypass global bottlenecks. Walt encouraged open dialogue, reminding everyone that the greatest breakthroughs often emerge from the toughest trials. Meanwhile, Michael and Susan spearheaded a new fundraising campaign, reaching out directly to supporters through heartfelt stories and transparent updates. The response was overwhelming. Small donations from retirees, truckers, environmentalists, and tech fans poured in, reaffirming that the Terra Mule was more than a product, it was a symbol of hope and resilience. One chilly morning, a breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. Evelyn, tinkering late into the night in the workshop, discovered a way to enhance battery performance using recycled materials sourced nearby. The discovery not only promised cost savings but also aligned perfectly with the project's sustainability goals. The news spread quickly, injecting new energy into the team. Walt felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "This is what happens when we refuse to give up," he said, eyes shining. The team pushed forward with renewed vigor, integrating the new battery tech and preparing the Terra Mule for an extended endurance test, a grueling 1,000-mile journey across the southeastern states. The test was designed to prove the truck's reliability and efficiency under real-world conditions. As the day arrived, Walt climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of leather and machine comforting him. Alongside him, a crew monitored systems remotely, ready to provide support. The road stretched ahead, winding through mountains, small towns, and sprawling highways. The journey was tough, icy patches, unexpected detours, and mechanical hiccups tested the team's resolve. At one point, a sudden snowstorm forced Walt to pull over, heart pounding but determined. He thought about the countless miles he had driven in harsher conditions, the late-night hauls that had built his character. "We're built for this," he whispered. Hours turned into days, but the Terra Mule held steady, its electric heart humming a steady rhythm. When the truck finally rolled into the finish line, greeted by cheers and applause, the sense of triumph was electric. Walt stepped out, muscles aching but spirit soaring. The endurance run was a testament, not just to the truck's capability, but to the team's unbreakable will. Media coverage followed, praising the Terra Mule as a game-changer in sustainable trucking and a beacon of late-life innovation. Yet, for Walt, the greatest victory was personal. The storm had tested him, pushing him to the brink, but it had also reaffirmed his belief that courage and persistence could break through any barrier. As the season turned toward spring, Walt found moments of quiet reflection. On a chilly morning, he sat alone on a hill overlooking the valley, the sun breaking through clouds in golden streaks. He thought of Elon Musk, a man who had ignited a revolution in more ways than one, whose fearless pursuit of the future had inspired him to rewrite his own story. Walt knew the road ahead would remain challenging, but he was no longer afraid. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a clearer, brighter path had emerged, one paved by risk, resilience, and the unyielding belief that it was never too late to change the world. Spring had finally settled over Asheville, painting the mountains in fresh greens and bursts of wildflowers, and with it came a new kind of energy swirling around the Terra Mule project. The electric trucks were now more than a technological marvel, they were becoming a symbol of transformation, not just in transportation, but in lives. Walt had settled into his advisory role, his days a blend of mentoring, strategy sessions, and moments of quiet pride. But the true gift of this phase was something he hadn't expected: reconnection. It began with a call from his daughter, Claire. They hadn't spoken in years, the silence between them heavy with old wounds and unspoken regrets. Claire's voice trembled as she said, "Dad, I've been following what you're doing. I'm proud." The words cracked open years of distance, and over the next weeks, phone calls turned into visits. They talked about the past, the mistakes, and the possibilities for healing. Walt felt a weight lifting, proof that it's never too late to rebuild what was broken. Meanwhile, at the workshop, Michael and Evelyn had launched a community outreach program, inviting local high school students to tour the Terra Mule facility and learn about clean energy and engineering. The enthusiasm was contagious. One afternoon, a shy teenager named Emily approached Walt after a tour. "I never thought I could do something like this," she confessed, eyes bright. "You've shown me it's possible." Walt smiled, seeing in her the same spark he'd felt decades ago. That moment reminded him that the true impact of the project extended far beyond the trucks themselves. It was about inspiring hope and possibility in unexpected places. One chilly evening, as Walt and Susan sat watching the sun dip behind the hills, a letter arrived, an invitation to speak at a national conference on aging and innovation. Walt hesitated, wondering if he was ready to share his story on such a big stage. But Susan's encouragement was firm: "Your journey is exactly what people need to hear." Standing before a packed auditorium, Walt told his story, not just the technical battles, but the emotional ones, the fears of irrelevance, and the courage to keep dreaming. The crowd was captivated, many moved to tears. Afterward, an elderly man approached him. "You gave me hope," he said quietly. "Hope that my best years aren't behind me." Walt's heart swelled. Around him, he felt a growing movement of older adults refusing to fade into the background, inspired to take risks and chase dreams anew. Back home, the Terra Mule team prepared for the next phase, expanding production to meet increasing demand. Walt oversaw the transition carefully, ensuring the core values of sustainability, resilience, and inclusivity remained central. Challenges persisted: material shortages, regulatory hurdles, but each was met with the same relentless spirit that had fueled the project from the start. One afternoon, Jessica Reynolds stopped by with exciting news: Tesla was ready to fully integrate the Terra Mule into its logistics network, a move that promised to propel the project to national prominence. The announcement sent waves through the industry, and Walt felt a surge of validation. But amid the celebrations, he never lost sight of what truly mattered. The people whose lives had been touched, the second chances given, and the legacy being built not just in trucks, but in hearts. On a quiet spring morning, Walt received a package from Elon Musk himself, a simple note and a photograph of a young Walt standing proudly beside his first truck, a symbol of the journey from past to present. The note read, "Keep pushing. Age is just a number. The future belongs to the brave." Walt pinned the photo on his office wall, a reminder that the risk was worth it, that transformation was always possible, no matter the season of life. As he looked out over the rolling hills, Walt felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The unexpected gift of reconnection, renewal, and rediscovered purpose had become the greatest achievement of all. The warm days of late spring were giving way to summer's embrace, but Walt's mind was restless, racing toward the final frontier of the Terra Mule's journey: nationwide adoption. The electric trucks had proven themselves through trials, storms, and skepticism, yet the road ahead was the steepest climb yet, convincing an industry deeply rooted in tradition to fully embrace change. Walt knew this wasn't just about technology, it was about culture, mindset, and the courage to leap into the unknown. The weight of this challenge sat heavy on him, but beneath it, a wellspring of determination flowed. The trucking world was vast and complex, with powerful unions, regulatory hurdles, and entrenched businesses guarding the status quo. Meetings with industry leaders often felt like battlegrounds. Walt faced questions laced with doubt: can these trucks really handle the hard miles? What about jobs for drivers? Is this just a fad? He met each concern with honesty, empathy, and data, but also with stories of perseverance, reinvention, and the lives transformed by this new path. One evening, as Walt prepared for a key presentation to a coalition of trucking companies, Susan found him in his workshop, the glow of computer screens casting shadows on his weathered face. "You've done everything you can," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Now it's about trust in what you've built and trust in the future." The next day, Walt stepped onto the stage at the National Trucking Summit, the largest gathering of industry voices in the country. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation and skepticism. Walt's heart pounded as he began, but his voice carried the steady conviction of a man who had faced fear and uncertainty head-on. He spoke not only of technology but of humanity. How the Terra Mule represented a new chapter where experience met innovation, where older workers could retrain and thrive, where sustainability wasn't a buzzword but a necessity. Midway through his talk, he shared a video message from Elon Musk, recorded just for the occasion. Elon's words echoed through the hall: "The future belongs to those who refuse to be limited by age, fear, or convention." Walt's journey reminds us all that transformation is possible, no matter when you start. The room was silent, then slowly erupted into applause. Afterward, Walt engaged in tough but productive conversations, laying the groundwork for pilot programs that would bring Terra Mule fleets to new regions and industries. The victories were hard-won, but each small step felt like a breakthrough. Back home, Michael and Susan managed the growing team with grace, and Walt found himself savoring quieter moments: morning coffee on the porch, walks through the flowering fields, and evenings spent sharing stories with Susan about how far they'd come. Yet, the looming question remained: had Walt done enough? Was this legacy strong enough to outlast him? One afternoon, while reviewing correspondence, Walt received a letter from a trucker named Joe, a man in his late 60s who had recently switched from diesel rigs to driving a Terra Mule. "Your story gave me the courage to try," Joe wrote. "I'm still learning, but I feel alive again. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." The letter moved Walt deeply. It was proof that the risk he'd taken was not in vain. In the weeks that followed, the Terra Mule fleet expanded to new states, the adoption slowly gaining momentum. Regulatory approvals were secured, partnerships strengthened, and the team prepared for the next milestone: a cross-country convoy demonstrating the truck's capabilities and reliability. As the convoy departed from Asheville, Walt stood among the gathered crowd, the sight of dozens of gleaming electric trucks ready to traverse thousands of miles filling him with pride. He knew this was more than a journey, it was a statement to the world that innovation, resilience, and courage could rewrite the rules. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Walt sat quietly with Susan, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of accomplishment. He reflected on the risks, the setbacks, and the moments of doubt. Above all, he realized the journey was never about proving others wrong, but about proving to himself that it was never too late to bet on the future. As the stars appeared overhead, Walt whispered to the night, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The summer sun rose slow and golden over Asheville, bathing the hills in warm light as Walt stood on the porch of the old family cabin, feeling the familiar weight of time mingled with a new sense of peace. The long, winding road of the Terra Mule project was nearing a milestone, but Walt's thoughts weren't on the trucks or the industry anymore, they were on the journey inside himself, the transformation that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about aging, purpose, and legacy. The cross-country convoy had returned weeks ago, a triumphant procession that made headlines and sparked conversations in every town it passed. The industry had taken notice, skeptics had softened, and believers had multiplied. But for Walt, the most profound change was personal. Years ago, he had carried the heavy burden of regret, of feeling forgotten, obsolete, a man outpaced by time. Now, he saw himself as a catalyst, a spark that ignited others, a bridge between generations, a reminder that reinvention was possible at any age. Walking inside, he found Susan in the kitchen, her face lit by the soft glow of the morning sun. They shared a quiet smile, a deep understanding born of battles fought and won together. "I never imagined this," Walt said, voice thick with emotion. "That I'd find purpose again, so late." Susan reached out, squeezing his hand. "You were never too old, Walt. You just needed to believe it." Their children and grandchildren gathered nearby, laughter and life filling the home. The family had healed, bonds mended by time and effort, proof that the heart could be renewed as surely as the mind. Walt's phone buzzed with messages from truckers who had joined the Terra Mule revolution, men and women rediscovering pride and passion behind the wheel, proving the power of second chances. In the weeks that followed, Walt was invited to speak at events celebrating innovation, aging, and the future of work. Each time, he told his story with raw honesty, the fears of fading away, the struggle to change, and the fierce joy of discovering new purpose. Audiences listened, captivated not just by the technology, but by the humanity woven into the tale. One evening, back at the cabin, Walt sat quietly in his study, surrounded by memories, old photographs, blueprints, letters from supporters. On the wall hung the photograph Elon Musk had sent him, young Walt standing proud beside his first truck. Walt reached out, tracing the image with a trembling finger. He thought about Elon, a man whose fearlessness had inspired him to take risks and shatter limits, who had shown that age was no barrier to dreaming big. Walt realized the truth he had come to live: it wasn't about waiting for permission to matter, it was about granting it to yourself. The future was not behind him, it was ahead, open and full of possibility. As the days warmed into late summer, the Terra Mule initiative expanded, drawing in partners from across the country and around the world. Walt watched with quiet pride as a new generation of innovators and dreamers took up the torch, building on the foundation he helped lay. The project was no longer his alone, it belonged to everyone who dared to believe in change. One afternoon, a surprise visit brought a letter from Elon Musk himself, delivered with a handwritten note, to Walt, whose courage reminds us all that the greatest risk is never taking one. Keep pushing the boundaries. Walt smiled, feeling the full circle of a journey that began with doubt and ended in hope. As the sun set behind the mountains, Walt and Susan stepped outside to watch the sky ignite in hues of orange and purple. The world was vast and waiting, and Walt felt ready for whatever came next. "I was never too old," he whispered, eyes shining. "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And now, that permission was his to give, to himself, and to all those who needed to hear the story of a man who bet on the future and won. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?